Okay, welcome back to the Optimum Drive podcast presented by TFL. I've got a couple of really cool episodes lined up to do right now, and I couldn't be more excited about the guest. You guys probably know who I am. My name's Paul Gerard. I'm former Top Gear Stig racing driver professionally for many, many years, too many to count, actually. Also the author of Optimum Drive, and also the host of this podcast, as well as being the driver for TFL whenever they do any track stuff. So on to my guest. So this guy is a legend. He also happens to be a really, really close personal friend. I'm very grateful to be able to say that. I've known him for a really long time. I've watched him come up through just doing little ride and drive programs with me to be one of the best known people in motorsports almost globally these days, because he just has such a wide range of capabilities. He also does so much stunt driving. You've seen him in a ton of movies, whether you realize it or not, and has done every sort of genre of racing you could really imagine. And probably now, hearing all of that and hearing that introduction, you might have an idea, because I'm narrowing it down with all these different accolades from this dear, dear friend. Let me introduce you all to Tanner Foust. Tanner, how you doing?
I'm good. That was much longer introduction than I expected.
It was much shorter than I could have done.
Yeah, no, anytime you hear the word legend, it just instantly equals old. It's like when somebody starts the sentence with the word listen. You know, when they say listen, this is what they're actually saying is and so when somebody says legend, that means old, and let's move past how old you are.
Yes. I mean, it both things are true, though. You are, man, I remember when I first met you, and I think it was on the BMW programs back in the day, in the late 90s. And you were a young guy then. And as a matter of fact, your nickname was Sprout.
Yeah, I remember. Yeah, Rex, that's right. He said, who's that little green guy that follows the Jolly Green Giant around?
That's right.
Like, Sprout. He's like, that's your name.
Yeah, exactly. And so, so that kind of stuck, because you were so young then. And I was asking around to who you were, and I learned this was before I'd moved to Colorado, and you were already here, of course, and working at the winter driving school. And that's sort of how you got to know Rex and all of that. And I want to go over all of this, actually, because that's the thing, I think, to everyone that's watching. To me, and thinking of what I like to do with these podcasts, where I like to relate it back to driving, and you have just such a cool history. I've been lucky enough to hear a lot of it. I think for folks that know you just as Tanner Foust racing driver, and I think a lot of people wonder how people become what you are. It's not an easy thing. Not many people do it. I mean, now you're an Extreme E racing for McLaren, doing just kind of like this, for lack of a better way, it's just sort of a wacky form of racing that's sort of next level, next generation. You're racing against Sebastian Loeb and, some of the best racing, Ekstrom, and the list goes on, some of the best racing drivers in the world. And yet you had this humble start at the winter driving school. And I think that's flipping amazing. And part of that, of course, is that really wasn't the start. And so tell us a little bit about what it was like to be even younger than Sprout. Maybe what were you like? You're like 20 then, not even 20. As far as the start of
winter driving school stuff. I'd already graduated college and was trying to figure out what to do. I graduated with a biology degree, and that was like a pre-med thing. It was, and sorry if you can hear the snorting in the background. I don't know if you can. It sounds like a pig is walking around my feet. It's a little French bulldog that is nicknamed the Pig, and that's why, because she's a snorter.
Every podcast should have a French bulldog in the background.
There should be some snorting going on, and I'm on a farm essentially, so that's it's apropos. But there's so as a kid, I was always into cars, like I'm sure virtually anybody watching this podcast. And it was never, I didn't, though, have any kind of racing connection. My dad was a doctor. My grandfather was a doctor. Everybody I knew were doctors. There was no race fan in the family. Never went to a racetrack. Apart from one time we lived in Monterey briefly, close enough to Laguna Seca that we could hear it. Went to go see what the noise was about. But I was a car fan. So I didn't know who'd won this championship, what the Indy 500 was, what discipline rally was, but I loved cars. I could pick any car out by its headlights. As a 6-year-old, which annoyed my sister to no end. I was all about cars, had all the posters, the quintessential white Countach on the grass, and a lot of the posters that we all had. But and then my dad, when I was 3, bought a 912E, which was this yellow Porsche that was a US only model. One of the slowest Porsches ever made, probably. I still have that car, but I was bitten by it pretty early, but I didn't know anything about racing until I saw rally racing videos, in the 90s. So there's
the old Duke videos, like VHS videos or DVD.
Straight up videos. That's right.
Straight up videos. Yeah, there was no YouTube.
In college, I did buy one of those. I don't know if it was an infomercial but it was a 1990 and 1991 WRC championship coverage DVD, and it was Colin McRae, Carlos Sainz, just cleaning house, bouncing their way through the forest. I mean, suspension's just terrible compared to cars now.
How old were you when you were looking at that? You said college just now, right?
Yeah, college. So I bought that DVD in college. It was from the 90-91 season, but so that would have been probably 97. I graduated college in 97. And when I got out of school, I pretty much realized that I didn't want to be a doctor. There's a terrible story about when my dad talked me out of being a doctor that I won't share, but you've probably heard it. Let's just say it involves, he was a gynecologist.
I was going to say, is this your dad's gynecologist?
Yeah, exactly. It involves me complaining about getting an ingrown toenail fixed and how a podiatrist has to work on sweaty feet. And my dad, while eating a tuna fish sandwich, just very eloquently put that his situation can be worse. Right. And then I was like, check, please, I'm out. I'm going to find something else, I think. And I started working for this guy, Bill Kitchen, who was an inventor in Longmont, and he invented amusement rides. He was entrepreneurial. I don't know if you've ever met somebody like him.
I met him at an event, and I remember he had 2 hyacinth macaws.
Yeah, that's right. He had macaws. That's right.
Yeah. And I remember he had a place like in Tampa or St. Pete, or was it Orlando?
He had one, I think, in Orlando is where he lives, but I know he had a place in down near Miami. But this was just somebody who was an entrepreneurial guy who saw something that was fun, figured out how to make value out of that fun for other people, and made amusement rides out of stuff. And it just, to me, that was the first time somebody just like conjured a living out of thin air. I'd never met somebody entrepreneurial like that, and I think it's contagious. And I think for me, the most 2 fun things were skiing and driving, and luckily I went to driving.
So you mentioned skiing there for a second.
Yeah.
And so let's hit the rewind button one more time on that. So when you were really young, what were you doing? You loved cars, you said. But how are you getting your kicks when you were a kid? What was sort of fun for you?
Younger than I could drive. I mean, I was riding a little BMX. I lived in Scotland in the middle. We lived in the middle of nowhere from 9 to 13, which were kind of those years.
Okay. Yeah.
That were critical. I was, jumping my BMX bike around and breaking things with BB guns and stuff, and getting like all the adolescent kids stuff.
Gun in Scotland?
Yeah. We had barns. We destroyed those barns. We shot everything. But that's why I don't experience road rage now. See, because I broke everything when I was 9, so it's we're good now.
We're
But
good. Okay.
yeah, no, but I did, my mom did let me drive part of our drive to school. We had an old Volkswagen bus, and she let me drive on this part of the drive was on an estate that was kind of a hunting estate. It was about 8 miles of the drive to school. And so that was my first time actually driving, like shifting gears. I mean, I'd sat on a lap and steered and, thought it was fun like any kid. But that was the first time shifting gears, and drove the bus. We had a Ford Fiesta that was a right hand drive, drove that one. And I drove them every day from 10 to 13 for that part of the trip to school. And then moved back to the States and had to wait 3 years, watch all my siblings get their driver's licenses. Those were the longest 3 years ever. But I was addicted to the driving. I don't know what it was. I still don't know what it is. It's but again, anybody listening to this knows that it's more of an obsession than a passion. Almost, it's really, you get so obsessed that it's all you can kind of think about when you wake up and when you go to sleep, and never thought about making a career doing it. Never thought that was even a possibility. Didn't even know that people could do that. But it was something that just ate at me for years until I got my license. And I was racing RC cars up until the day I got my license. Then everything went for sale. Was just obsessed with anything car related, and but still didn't have a motorsport bug yet. Still didn't understand that there was a business of motorsport out there. And that didn't really happen until I got out of college and was working for the inventor, Bill. He moved to Florida. And I've told you this, I think, before, where when I flew back from Florida to Denver at one point, there was that racetrack next to the airport, Second Creek Raceway.
Yeah.
And I saw that racetrack there. I went to it. I kind of, even as we were landing, which is funny because I took off from DIA in my own little plane yesterday. So now I know what runway that was, runway 25. And I literally saw that. I followed the roads back to the airport to see how to get there. Got there, and I ended up getting a job with one of the race teams as a mechanic, and just to be close to it, just to learn more about it.
That's fantastic. I mean, it's really cool too. And I think I don't know, it's just so interesting how something, I mean, when we're so young, just gets sort of attached in our heads, and it, like you said, an obsession. And you have, I mean, you can't even put your finger on why, other than you liked cars. That's what you said. Like, you didn't even know racing was like really a thing. You just thought cars were cool. And that was like, my son was the same way. He could pick out any car with the badge, like I taught him that one, and he just latched onto that, and he learned all that so quickly when he was just a couple of years old, and he'd point out cars to me all the time. It's just so, I don't know. It's interesting how some things are really sticky, in our brains like that.
It's almost, I mean, for me, I remember when I noticed driving. I remember the exact road, the exact turn, Colorado Boulevard to Hamden on in the 912, going by, I think it's Wilshire Golf Course or something right there. There's kind of a sweeping second gear right. And I remember my dad kind of had the tires squealing around the corner one time. And that was when I was sitting in these sheepskin, seats in this 912.
Of course.
the camel leather.
Did he have string back driving gloves? Driving gloves on the time?
Probably. The Blaupunk there, and like all the very Porsche thing. And I just remember thinking, like, what was that? Like, something happened that was kind of cool. And that thing had kind of a weird shifter where when it was in second gear, it was actually buried into the sheepskin, because the throw was so long on those things. And I just started seeing driving as like a superpower. I'd ride with different people. They drove differently. How they were with the clutch was different. How they took corners was different. Okay. And it was like this superpower that, was skill that people had, some better than others.
Yeah.
And I mean, I've never talked about it like this before, really thought about it like this, but I just think I grew up, we didn't need freedom. as 6-year-olds or 5-year-olds. It wasn't like we were needing to, adventure the globe on this ribbon of asphalt. It was just this power that these people had that were allowed to drive that we didn't have. And I don't know, I do remember paying attention to how people drove, what their level was, how smooth they were with stuff and whatever, my whole life before getting a license. And so yeah, it was about the superpower. That's what I wanted.
That's really cool. I mean, that's a really interesting. I mean, I think that sort of speaks volumes to you because I know how you are, and we're going to talk about this more and more. But you're very detail oriented and you're very observant, and that's one of the cool things. I've been lucky enough to kind of look over your shoulder and help you out in some races back in the day, and I've always claimed you were like the best guy I ever worked with, just from that because of that. I'm hearing it now and not realizing it as long as I've known you. I've never heard you describe it like that. And I just think that's fascinating how because I as you were saying it, I'm like, I don't have recall of how well people drove when I was really young. That came later. That came later. Now it drives me crazy, like the driver or the whatever, right? You're like,
you just develop your judgmental nature later.
You were judgmental right from the very beginning.
Yeah, I was judging the crap out of everybody. Trust me.
That's I think that's interesting because I mean ponder that like to people watching this. To you didn't know how to drive, but you were critical of people's driving. I think
what an arrogant friend.
I think that yes, you said it earlier. I think that's kind of fantastic in a way. That's cool because, like, for me, I'll give you and there's a lot of parallels between you and I. Funny, strangely enough, like we were in similar parts of the world for similar times in our lives, which is just completely random. Yes. I think, and we do have kind of a very similar mindset. And those of you that don't know, by the way, Tanner did write the foreword to my book. To Optimum Drive, and it was like really well written. When I read that, he was like, "What do you think?" And I'm like, I'm almost in tears, like because you really understood what I was saying and what I was trying to say, and that's why you were the perfect guy to do that. So it's so funny. It's just so funny hearing you say things that particular, and kind of I'm making you kind of dig into your, back in the back of your brain where you haven't thought in a long time about sort of what brought you to do what you do so well. And I think that's neat. And for me, like I'll say like for me it was more like I was always imagining driving, and so whenever I was on my bike and I rode bikes and raced BMX and all that stuff, and then of course was skiing as well, and I was always imagining driving, and relating it to that and going, is that what it feels like, and feeling the back tire of my bike slide and imagining it were a car, like, and skidding, grabbing the back brake and making it do it intentionally, going, look at me, and say, is all that correlation like an association that was bouncing around in my head? Were you doing that as well while you were riding bikes and skiing?
No.
I love it. I love that that's the answer.
Yeah.
I love that that's the answer because, again, this is why you're different. I should have not been doing that, evidently, because you're way more successful than I am.
Well, no, the skiing was different because it was more emulation of my dad, because he was a great skier and was Olympic hopeful in the 60s and stuff. So I spent all my time skiing just trying to look like he looked. But the biking, yeah, I mean, we did jumps and tried to slide things around and stuff, but I never raced go-karts. I never had a feeling of oversteer or understeer. I never put that together with the car factor. I think if I would have done that, I would have been, I would have been into car racing earlier. You know what I mean? Because I loved it on a bike, and the bike was our only freedom in Scotland. We just went forever. And
what's the furthest you went away from home in Scotland on your bike?
Well, we had the closest town was 8 miles, so we'd go there, and it was a huff. It doesn't seem like much, but 16 miles round trip on basically a Huffy with mag wheels and big tires. one speed, especially on these little roads where you're getting like clipped from people going 90 miles an hour on these little, oh, tiny, tiny roads. But yeah, it was a big day when we went to Brecon. That was the name of the town. But we never, yeah, no, I didn't make the connection to cars. I tried riding on the ice and stuff, but yeah, that's interesting that you already had that experience with cars, I think.
I was already kind of associating anything I did with what I wanted to do, which was I wanted to race cars. But I think you were doing that just not consciously in a way, because it's like think of the feeling in the 912, right, that you had with your dad going around that ramp. And that's probably like you're like, in a way, maybe on some level, you're like, that's that feeling I had on my bike when I railed a corner on it or on a pair of skis or whatever that might have been.
Yeah, that may have been a connection there. And I just didn't know. Yeah. I just didn't know how he did it. I just didn't know how he did it. Sorry, this pig is like really complaining over there. Can you hear that?
Yeah, I heard it. Yeah.
Oh, you can. Yeah. It's like really complaining. I mean, yeah, she's just about to crap all over the carpet right now.
Coming up on part 2.
Yeah, exactly.
You got to do that as a cliffhanger.
Yeah, well, that'll be good. Did the dog crap on the carpet? We just don't know. So I never really had the whole understanding of what went into driving. I didn't. Yeah, I'm when I try to think about what the bite was, it just was about how cool the cars are, the stats. I was like, you remember that time when there was always the baseball kid that knew all the stats on the baseball people and teams, and then there was the football stat kid. And for me, I was the stat kid on the cars, like the top speeds and the 0 to 60 of the 944 that could do it now slower than a minivan. But it still is like, that was, can you imagine going 0 to 60? Remember the 959 came out in 3.2 seconds and you're just like, impossible. Yeah. And that it was an imagination thing. I didn't have even the rich friend really who had this stuff, that you would experience it. Because I did meet friends like that later who always had sort of the rich friend that they got in the car sometimes and they got to taste it that way. But maybe that's why it took so long to turn it into something. And it really was until I was out of college. And I took a swing at Boulder at mechanical engineering, aerospace engineering actually. And the dream job there was to be the guy holding the little smoke, thing that makes the little
in the wind tunnel.
You knew I was going to say the word vortice at some point here.
Here. Okay. Well, how far in are we?
Yeah. And that was the dream job. And then we did this like go to work with a real life engineer kind of a thing. And these engineers had nothing to do with anything that seemed fun. They designed valves that monitored other valves. And that valve controlled a bigger valve. And that was it. There was no like macro. You were those guys in the white trench coats doing the like aeronautical stuff. They had been working for like 40 years already to get to that point. And I just got so turned off of engineering that I was really lost at that point. And that's why I fell back into biology, which I actually got into molecular biology because it was very similar to kind of the space orbital mechanics that we studied with aerospace engineering. Aerospace is kind of broken into space and planes. And when you start out as a freshman, you learn both. And the space is all orbital mechanics and gravity, which is really similar to molecular biology. But the plane stuff is really what I think I was interested in. It was like aeronautics and hydrodynamics and fluid flow, but I just never got to explore.
Specifically vortices.
Honestly, I swear I've looked at when I was working with the inventor. When you work for somebody as contagiously entrepreneurial as that, I would see the drain in the bathtub and I'd be like, I know there's an invention there. I know there's something amazing having to do with that little tornado and capturing that energy somehow. Somebody's gonna do it. And everywhere you looked, you'd always be like, dang it, I know there's some invention that solves a problem. But yeah,
Misplaced optimism.
that's part of being a man. Let's be honest.
That's I think I think it's so cool. I literally love discussions about people's childhoods because again it frames us in some way that I don't think we ever wrap our heads around how influential it is on our entire lives. How little things, little occurrences, good, bad, and otherwise. I remember, you're talking about how no one with a fast car. My dad happened to have a friend that worked on Lamborghinis. When I first moved to the US, I lived for 1 year in Maryland in Cockeysville. I remember, I'm trying to remember his name. I think his last name was Schmidt. He was a German guy. I got to sit in a Lamborghini Espada when I was 8 years old. And it's just like I just remember the smell. Like
that'll get the hook in just that.
yeah, it's just that leather, that Italian leather, and you just smell that. You look at the shape of that car. Even me as an 8-year-old, and I'm not very tall, I'm like going slinking down into this thing, going. It's speaking to your aeronautical dreams, it felt like an airplane or a spaceship. And
Yeah.
I have those little moments like that. It's like you even think about seeing a car on the road, like that you remember as a kid. If you saw something that rolled down the road that you didn't see every day, something exotic that leaps off the pages of a car magazine. The other thing about when you were saying it, Tanner, but I still remember the 0 to 60 time of the Lamborghini Countach from 1975. It was 6.7 seconds to 60. Like I have those stats in my head. And I remember the Porsche Turbo in 76 doing, I think is in 6.2. And that was ridiculously fast.
Well, the 959, that
the 959 and
was
89.
a real number.
Yeah, well, that's a long time later.
It was a 3.2, but it was the lightweight version did 3.2, and I think the other one did 3.5.
It was the back of the Road and Track and the Car and Drive. Remember
yes. Oh, dude, I scold those every single time.
Every single month that magazine came out, I'd go look at those stats, and I would look for the new cars, and I would go back to my favorite old cars too, and see what the fast cars were. I would just look at it over and over again. Like you said, just completely obsessed.
I mean, I know that our parents are an influence and what they're interested in, you would tend to be maybe interested in, but kids are easy prey for these designers of these supercars that wield this magic of passion that is designed to convince a pessimistic, stale old businessman to buy their car over the other one. So it has to exude so much passion and leather and smell and all this incredible stuff to convince that salty old bastard to want to buy it.
The kid inside that salty old bastard.
Yeah. And kids are just these fresh palates with no tolerance to that kind of, I don't know, drug. And you sit in there and you can't help but just be completely mesmerized to the point that affects your whole life. Like that one take of that drug as an 8-year-old affected your entire life.
Absolutely.
And it's the same for me, just sitting in that car going around one corner as a 5-year-old.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think that's something that's really kind of cool. And again, it's just, we count ourselves lucky to be exposed at the right moment to the right thing, and bam, it just stuck, and your imagination just takes off with it. And I think that's the part about maybe a lot of this, and even as we get into driving and we get better and better at it, we never lose that visualization. Like we were little kids imagining that we would get to drive a car like that one day, or what would it be like to drive a car like that one day. And then we're adults racing at a new track, and we're doing laps in our head, trying to imagine, because we have to race on it tomorrow. It's a skill that was just I don't know, it was a luxury, it was escapism. It was just dreaming when we were children. But it gets honed into almost like a skill set after you do it your whole life. I think that's kind of cool. I want to go back to Bill, because you didn't get to say what you did with him besides staring evidently down toilets, which sounds weird as I repeat it.
bathtubs, but okay, it's fine.
Bathtubs.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah,
Bathtubs.
yeah. You mean Bill, as in like what he did, what his company
And
did?
what you did for him.
Oh, well, I mean, I had a variety of jobs for
Yeah.
Bill, but started out as I was a lot guy in Boulder, and I helped the sales guys sell cars essentially on this lot, and I sold his son a car, and the Bill invented amusement rides, and so I did a variety of things from shipping in the his office in Longmont to trying out new amusement
This is
rides.
the part.
Yeah, the guinea pig factor was interesting in that particular job. There was, I did a lot of model building stuff, and we tried some things rarely ourselves, but it was ultimately I'd build these architectural models that would mimic the ride in hopes that that could help the patent process, could help the patent attorney understand the way to write the patent in order to come out with the right innovation that was, profitable. And making money out of an idea was a fascinating thing, but it was cool to be a part of that from the inside, sort of watch it from a spark to, ooh, that looks like fun, to somebody actually making a bunch of money on it. It was pretty crazy.
And so you were the guinea pig at times, though.
So at times a amusement ride guinea pig,
So
but
explain the ride and what it was like to be the first person. Did you start with a sack of potatoes and then work your way to Tanner Foust? How did that work?
well, see, Bill was in the industry before I got involved with him. He was he did bungee cord stuff, and so I didn't know him during those days. Although we did use some of the bungee cords we found in his house on a ski boat and contraption with an inner tube, which was a really, really bad idea in hindsight.
It's bad enough on the road.
This is an awesome.
Hold on to the dock as long as you can. I'm going to floor the boat.
That's what it was. Oh yeah, no, four guys would clamp you to the dock, and we'd hook it up to the jet ski. And jet ski would just take off until you just couldn't hold it any longer. And it was 1 out of 3 times you could actually hang on to the thing, but you'd wrap your legs around the front of it. We literally reinforced the handles. We were wearing gloves and ski gloves and everything. And yeah,
this is the first time you achieved low Earth orbit. When
it was like a
past the jet ski at Mach 2.3.
You did catch up to the jet ski pretty fast, but that was so those guys, it was this guy Matt Eaton and Michael Kitchen. Michael was Bill's son. Those guys had been working on the bungee stuff, and then when the Sky Coaster came along, that's when I kind of got involved, and that was essentially a big swing set that you got pulled back, and you released a 3-ring harness from skydiving tech, and then you just did a big pendulum. It's in every amusement park. It probably had its heyday, but they still probably build them around the world, and they make good money for parks and stuff. The first one of those was a crane, and I did swing on that crane. And those old early days, you'd have I know that there was a screwdriver in the 3-ring release and a F4 250 like backing up with a cable hooked onto its bumper, and that cable went up through the crane and down and pulled you back up to that crane, and you were kind of hanging from a second one, and you did a big pendulum. We had a lot of concepts that we abandoned because the models would like break, and we'd have the simulated people on the models and they would break. There was one ride that I was working on that I did build the model. I built the model of it. It got patented. They built the actual ride down in Gulf Shores, Alabama, I think.
Of course you do it there. No liability laws in Gulf Shores, Alabama.
Oh man, I was there helping, like getting hands on, like seeing what went in to build the rides and stuff. And the ride just started coming apart.
Oh my God.
And yeah. The crane that was pulling it down, it got misaligned and broke one of the things in this 20-ton piece of concrete. Anyway, I won't go into exactly how it broke and all that kind of stuff, probably because it's illegal for me to even talk about it, but it's just started throwing metal everywhere. and I was on this man lift going, beep, beep, like moving like, 1 mile an hour.
You're trying to get
Eventually
out of
jumped out.
there.
Yeah,
Full throttle, baby. Beep.
jumped out of it. But yeah, there was a lot of education that went on in that
Did he
from a
have an
business
engineer
side.
doing all the analysis of this thing, or was it he did? Yeah.
He did, and the thing about engineering is that sometimes the tolerances that you need in the real world when you've got 19-year-olds operating stuff, you need to have a bit more redundancy than you would ever imagine.
Right.
But that was a lesson learned. Bill went on to invent a skydiving wind tunnel. I built a model, or modified this model for this, and it was a vertical wind tunnel that had the fans on top. Ended up selling that. I think I don't know exactly how the business deal went down, but he sold it to somebody who started iFly, and so that's what those are, which
They're
now
around
are,
the country. Yep.
yeah, they're popping up around the country. But that's all under that same patent of being sucked up into a vertical wind tunnel instead of blown up by like a big DC3 motor like the one in Vegas is like that. Yeah, and those were fun projects because it was about the business for me. That's what I found so fascinating, is how is this guy literally he sees something swing and he's like, oh man, you could make a ride out of that. I wonder how we could get, and then figures out all the ways to, okay, then we supply the clothing. Then they have to buy our stuff for 15 years. And then we get 5% of their revenue for, licensing the name. And, he works out all the angles. And I loved that creative side of, just, like I said, just magically creating a living out of just an idea. It's not, it's
idea,
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like a superpower also.
It is.
And everybody has ideas, but that's like 2% of the work is having the idea.
I can so relate to that, because the whole thing, the business side of it, I am absolutely hopeless at, because I'm just too excited about the thing, and I didn't want to move on after that. I'm like, let someone else figure it out, kind of deal. But I just don't have I think the patience or the mind for it. I don't know, a combination of both, or probably I'm just simply not smart enough.
Well, the patience is also a byproduct of the hunger, So if you really wanted that jet so bad, that that was your number one focus, that you wouldn't need to be patient. It would be, it didn't matter how much time it would take.
I'm on to the next thing, I think. Like, what's
you
next?
may not be motivated by that. Yeah.
That's cool. So, okay. So, I had this thought about it, we're going to get to talking about Hot Wheels and our little jump we did together. But when I just thought about you on the crane just now, and I've always really struggled with your unbelievable grace under pressure during that Hot Wheels stunt. And in a way, like for me, like that was all new. And I just kind of connected those two things together. Like, you've actually done stuff similar with that. You're getting hoisted up by a crane, just like we did in that damn truck. And and you're just like, why am I doing this?
I think, if there was anything that contributed to that sort of mental, I think I know what you're talking about. And when I was in Boulder, I got way into rock climbing and was doing that 4 or 5 days a week. I took a hiatus from school, did not get good grades in engineering, went skiing for a semester, came back, was a lot guy in Boulder at a Mitsubishi dealership, ended up getting my first racing ride out of that because the manager / owner of the dealership and I became co-driver for rally racing for 5 years, and Scott Crouch. And so, but all those years I was climbing 4 or 5 days a week. And when I would go 4 days without climbing, I'd get back on the rock again. And even if my muscles were kind of fresh because they'd been rested and I was strong, I'd notice that I'd get, even just talking about it right now, I get a little bit slippery on my fingers from being mentally unfit. And there's this amazing uh, I don't know what to call it, but it's like a mental fitness where you just think yourself out of being nervous about it, because being nervous has a very physical reaction that
Yes.
makes you slip off.
Yeah.
And so you get this really direct cause and effect of your thought, what you allow yourself to think about. And it's the same with having asthma. Like I grew up with kind of this like mild form of asthma, and playing soccer and stuff. You could think about a dry, dusty field with hay blowing in your face and just wheeze instantly, which I could probably do right now. Or I'd have a place that I would
That was the
go
dog.
swimming. Yeah, exactly. Now the dog can't stop thinking about it. Yeah. But there's this. I think you start to have these. You have these little moments where you start to formulate almost a brain muscle memory on how to. I'm not saying this is directly what is the Hot Wheels story that you're talking about, but I've noticed throughout
That's
my career.
fascinating though in its own right, because I love that direct causality of your fingertips getting wet, causing you
And
to
then
fall off the rock. And you're like,
you're off.
so it's kind of, I mean, if you think about that in driving, there's obviously absolute parallels to that, where if you have a momentary lapse in focus and concentration mid corner, bad things will happen, and I think so that's really cool. So, I've known you for over 20 years, well over, I'd say we'd say easily 25 plus years now. That was a super cool story right there about the rock climbing, that I did not know. I knew you did it, but to hear you describe it in that way, um, again, what I want to do, when I say this, I want this to be two parts. Is like we eventually do start just talking about driving, but I think this stuff is just gold, because again, as I've been suggesting and you've been confirming with your stories, like it's what makes us who we are,
Yeah.
and then that ultimately affects who we can be in a way, and sort of the capabilities that we have, because there's a certain mindset that gets laid in place, and it's either very efficient and productive, or it could be the opposite of that. And I think you talk about talking about molecular biology, and then thinking about the engineering of amusement park rides that are not existing rides. They're things that Bill's conjuring up, and you're helping him sort of sort through the process of bringing something like that to market. All of that, it just speaks of a mindset in a way, that you're developing, as you're going. And I think it's cool. It's so cool in a way, because it's like you said, you like the business side of it. It's like that's that curiosity, I guess, is a really good word for all of this. When you're just sort of curious about your potential, and not only your own potential, you see someone like Bill that's able to conjure something out of nothing, and you're just like, I want that. Do I have that potential? So I think all of those things are kind of, they're very elemental at first, but they make you who you are today.
If yeah, I mean, in hearing you talk about it, I haven't thought about it like this necessarily, but all those instincts that we have as people were necessary to get us through the first 50,000 years and maybe 100,000 years. But it's like, at this point, a lot of those instincts are not needed for us to survive, right? And so we almost have this opportunity at this point in humanity where we can kind of accelerate ahead of ourselves and look back and study those conditions, that human condition. We can study those instincts, and we can look at them, kind of reflect back at them, and how they are in unhuman situations like driving or skiing or whatever,
Yeah.
and see how they affect us positively or negatively, almost always negatively, as we've talked about many times. But we can actually reflect back at our human condition from a safe space, because we're not relying on those instincts day in and day out just to eat and survive and live. It's kind of it's a unique time, and maybe there's going to be a time when we get so separated from needing those
Yeah.
instincts that we don't even recognize them anymore. But
Well,
at this point,
we just end up like Wally, where they're floating around in the chairs and being excited about the Slurpees changing from red to blue. Like that's our woo.
fair enough.
It's going to be a great day. But so like if we accepted sort of the point. Like I think they say there's so many things that you hear all the time. They say like we live today better than a king did 100 years ago. Like we have more access to medicine, we have more access to travel, we live more comfortably, we live in a more comfortable environment where we have air conditioning and heating and all those things that were like super rare not that long ago. And we have so much of what we had to rely on from the hunter-gatherer us, let's say 150 years ago and earlier, at least. And then, to now where, we just go to we hit the easy button on just about everything in our lives and stare at our phones all day. So that's like the not accepting the challenge that you're throwing out there and going, we have opportunity here to take humanity to kind of a next level with all this freedom, that cognitive bandwidth and freedom that we have, because we're not worried about whether we're going to get eaten by a saber-toothed tiger if we step out of our cave today, kind of thing. So I think that's all fascinating stuff, and it is interesting. But you can see how, as humanity, we love the easy button. We damn love it, and we're all guilty. We're all guilty of it on some respects. I think wouldn't it be cool to have the work ethic of someone trying to just stay alive 200 years ago with the accessibility of what we have laid in front of us at our grasp today? We probably would be superhuman in some way, shape, or form.
Oh, yeah.
Because
there's no organ more willing to take the path of least resistance than the brain.
Oh yeah.
And that's, it utilizes its intellect just to find the easier street, for sure.
Yeah, so it's an interesting topic for sure that we could probably spend a lot of time talking about. But and that's the neat thing about driving and having an obsession, as you said, or a passion for something, is you do have some place to put, anytime you want to raise the bar a little bit, or pull drag yourself screaming and kicking away from the easy button towards becoming better at something. At least you got something, right? You got something that you love and you're financially tied to, because it's how you make your living, so there's a lot of incentive there to continue raising the bar and making it better. But I think again, I go back, and this is why I wanted to talk to you about all of this, because I knew some of it and you're surprising me with more of it. But it's interesting to see what makes you who you are a little bit. And even it's kind of cool to hear you say comments like, I haven't really thought about this, and then you say something that, it's sort of, it's even new to you. You're like, I hadn't really connected those dots. So that's really cool. So I'm going to make you keep dragging things out of your brain. You don't want to drag out of your brain. So we're up to, you met Scott Crouch. You're at the Mitsubishi dealer.
Yeah.
And you got your first little taste of driving gig, and the other cool one that we didn't really expound upon, but you were working with a team at Second Creek, because you found the racetrack. So let's kind of pick it up from there, and let's keep going.
So there was a guy that came. I just literally drove up to the edge of the track, got out of my car. Cars are going around it. They look kind of like vintage cars, maybe. And I walked up to the tire wall, and a guy came out of kind of a bomb shelter looking warehouse and told me I couldn't stand there. And I kind of asked him about racing and are these people like with race teams? I'd never been really as an adult to the racetrack. And his name was Rich Dahl, and he had a team that was an arrive and drive and also a servicing team for spec Ford racers and Formula Mazdas. All gentlemen racers. And he was very seat of his pants, and he had enough going on that he was, if you saw his office, he looked like Chevy Chase. First, that was the first thing I noticed right off the bat. I knew I'd like him because, I was a big Fletch fan. And his office was just stacks of receipts and papers and all this kind of stuff. And so I was trying to figure out how I might have some value to this guy. And Bill had sold his company. Bill Kitchen had sold his company and was moving to Florida. That's why I went there to go check it out. And so I was 100% invested in Bill's company. So I think I got $8,300 as my part of it. And I was set for life. That was it. I
So
was
fortunate,
done.
yes.
I was done. So I literally
Buying a
said
Formula
to,
One ride.
yeah. I mean, I told Rich, and when I saw his office, I was like, "Look, I could get you like Excel spread. I knew how to do stuff on Excel, so I'll get you like sorted out on some accounting stuff." And this is before QuickBooks and that kind of stuff. And in return for seat time in the cars, and because I didn't need the money, I don't want your money. I just want some seat time in the car. So I worked 8 months as a mechanic, and the Excel stuff took like 3 days. And then I went to work as a mechanic for 8 months. And on the spec Fords, I went to Sebring and worked on the Formula Mazdas there, and went to different races and tests, and it was very, very cool. I learned a lot about that side of the business of motorsport. But out of that 8 months, I got one practice, and then my license with gosh, I can't remember that guy's name at Second Creek, but and then I got one race, and then that's what I got, and that that was in a spec Ford. I got third in the race, and that I was super nervous about that race because at that point I had no proven skills, no experience, um, just an obsession, and I knew that I could completely suck. And I'd already
That's what
taught,
happens when you take a risk, right? It could always go completely wrong.
and I'd already kind of resigned to the fact that the real test was I getting better? Did I have the propensity to learn it, or was I so set in my little handbraking my Honda Civic, around corner ways in Northern Virginia, just like you? Sorry, but
Yeah.
yes. And was I so set in that muscle memory that I couldn't learn anything else? So
Who
that's
was
what I was.
teaching you? Was someone teaching you, or were you teaching yourself?
No, it's just Rich. Just Rich was the team owner, and then the school that I went to, you had to go to school to get your SCCA license. It was
What was
pretty.
the school you went to?
It was not Jim Christian. It was another Colorado
Okay.
like school SCCA guy,
Okay.
but
Okay.
he's just a super old dude that showed you a line, talked about
Yeah.
heel and toe, and did all the basics. And that I ended up uh, bullshitting my way from there a bit. Um, that first race, this is before GoPro cameras and stuff like that, so nobody really could collect video or see themselves from the outside, you know.
Right.
And so I would run a service where I would follow people during practice sessions and give them a couple tips. And I charged $120 to do that. And um, I only went to people that, like on previous races, that I had qualified better than. And that would, and I did, and I was really cognizant not to come off arrogant or anything like that. Just, we're all here to learn. It's just, you never get somebody's perspective from the outside. You're racing against them. They see the mistakes you've made. They just take advantage of them. They don't walk up to you and say, "Hey, by the way, you could track out a little further on the third turn and you'd be way better off." So I just did that for people, and people would get faster. It really turned quickly into all I had to say was brake later, accelerate earlier, and that pretty much summed up everything. But it was I did probably 4 people per race, and that covered tires and some of the racing. But so I did spec Fords for a year. I did it with Jim Christian Racing. He was the guy who gave a scholarship. For $3,500, you got 10 races, not including tires. And so then I would pay for tires with that coaching service, is how it worked out.
And so this was before the Scott Crouch and the Mitsubishi dealer, or the same time?
That's this is before that. And yeah, Scott Crouch came just after that.
And do you remember me coming out and running one of those Fords with you?
I
I did.
remember, I do remember that. I do remember that. And it
I'm
was,
trying. I cannot remember how that came about, but you invited me out to drive one of those Fords, and I came out and drove it.
that's right. I probably was the Jim Christian Ford. Probably was Jim Christian
Yeah, because I was going there. I think, and I'm trying
at
to
the same
remember.
time.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember if I was going there with. No, no, this was way before the Evo. So that was the first time I'd ever been to that track. Was literally that day. Was when I came out
That's
and
right.
drove.
You paid $350, and I
Yeah,
think I paid the same amount. No, we split it. You did. I think we did. I think we split it, and we did a full test day in one of those cars. We had the track to ourselves, right? It wasn't like a.
man,
I'm pretty sure.
we should have got our facts together before we went on a podcast. I do not remember paying money for that. I remember us doing
Maybe
something
so
like
that
that.
makes me one of your first sponsors then.
It does make
That's
you
what
one of my first sponsors.
No, that was okay. So to put the chronology, I worked as a mechanic. One of the drivers in the Formula Mazda came on board, Kevin Schrantz, and he had a logo on the car that was the Bridgestone Winter Driving School.
Uh-huh.
And then I asked him about that, and he introduced me to Jerry Pearl and Mark Cox up at the Winter
Okay.
Driving School up here at Steamboat.
Yeah.
And and then I got a job there in the winters, met Morgan and Rex were buddies. And then I went and did the first BMW program where I met you. And then I bet it was later that summer or the next summer that we did
Yeah,
that
it
spectrum.
must have been. I just remember you inviting me out, and I came out and drove just for. I only did like a few laps in the car, but you were going to be there. I was like, oh, cool, I'll come. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. I do remember the first ride and drive we did pretty well. My memory's a little grayer than yours
Yeah.
since you don't drink.
The reason the
Yeah.
memories, and it doesn't sound like it, by the way, judging by you had better recall of us at Second Creek, but yeah, I'm designated driver for life because I've never had a taste for drinking, so I never drank, and so everyone whether they like me or not loves having me around.
Yeah.
You know they're going to get back because good old Paul
Yeah.
will wheel the minivan and get the thing back to the hotel, and the world will be okay the next morning besides the hangover. But
Yeah.
yeah, but we had a good time. So you did. Let's before we dive off into that world, because this conversation will quickly devolve into debaucherous parties and things like that were going on. But you were kind of like at that point, because you started doing winter driving school stuff and you were doing stuff with Scott Crouch, you wanted to be a rally driver.
Yeah.
Right?
I learned from Rich Dahl and these Formula Mazda guys that what it cost. And that was to race club Formula Mazda.
Right.
I mean, like everyone, I saw Indy cars, I saw Formula One cars, I played Atari, Grand Prix. That's what I saw as racing. And when I learned that you could spend $1 million in a summer and still know and win the championship, and that didn't really help you raise money even for the next year.
Yeah.
I was like, this is not the game that I'm, going to be capable of going into. But rally was kind of the sport less. It was the path less traveled, I guess. And working at the ice driving school, I really got a taste for sliding around and rally driving and efficiency while sliding and that
like
kind
that.
of
I like that.
our control.
Yeah,
So
and
that's
by the way, that's what I heard about you before I knew who you were. Like when you were being described to me, and I'm trying to remember if it was like Jerry or Mark or maybe Morgan, but they're like, we got this kid, Tanner, and I'm like, that's a weird name. Okay, keep going. And they go,
yeah.
and they're like, he is really good. And I think Kevin was telling me as well, though Kevin was telling me in a way because Kevin was racing at the time. He was not happy about this super quick kid Tanner. Like the other guys, the older guys were like, they were completely late. They loved talking about, but they were saying how just sort of exceptional you were. And I remember the first thing they were saying, like, he'll just go and do these forward 360s down the straightaway at the ice track, you know, and everyone else is just kind of going, what the heck? And then the other thing I remember about the winter driving school when I was there as a kind of a guest instructor, occasionally I came
Yeah.
out, but you do the morning race, which was like the best thing about the winter driving school was all the instructors every
Yeah.
morning did a race, and
Oh, yeah.
that was the
That's
best, wasn't it?
I used my Excel spreadsheet skills at that point, right? We had little, every corner we'd have a couple different waypoints so that we could graph each driver and see where the different instructors were beating other instructors. And I'd spend half my time doing that, it seemed like. But yeah, that was super fun. The morning races were awesome. Morgan was a big like leader of those races, and he
Yeah,
was always really fast.
yeah, he
And
was.
yeah, he's really fast. And it was kind of like one of those things where if you did something kind of special, you could beat Morgan, but if you ever made a mistake, no
Yeah,
chance. And so he was a great like litmus test
yeah.
of how things were going that day. But that was so much fun. I mean, ripping around on the ice track, you'd make your own cloud over Steamboat. That's when the track was right in the middle of town.
Yeah.
And yeah, it was definitely good times there. I also had gotten a job at Pikes Peak International Raceway at some point in that time frame as a sales guy for the track, trying to maybe figure out how to raise money to do all this stuff.
You're really
And
taking advantage of that molecular biology degree that you had.
yeah, my family was so proud. They were, yeah. So how are those MCAT studies going? Good. Yeah. M what's? Yeah. But it was, yeah. So that I learned a lot at Pikes Peak on, um, again, why people spend money. That expanded my relationship with Kevin. I helped him find sponsorship basically in return for a commission, and it was he had something that was sellable because he raced for real time racing in World Challenge and it was on TV, and I didn't really have anything of value that I could leverage against to raise money. My first sponsor was Optima Batteries. They gave me $300 to go race the Spec Ford. The guy who gave me that money was a guy named Cam Douglas, who was kind of a marketing guy in the company at the time, and now he runs the whole show over there for marketing at Optima. And
Still a
he's still,
sponsor.
well,
Exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
How cool
And
is that?
yeah, he went. I mean, we went away and then came back again, but it's very cool. And it's the biggest lesson that I learned really is that you can't burn any bridges, because these people, even if they're just a starting out marketing, bottom of the rung kind of person, they're going to be running the show and writing the checks in not too many years if you really want to have a career for a while. So you need to be, you know, need to be real with everybody and make the right call with everybody and be respectful of everybody, because that's the only way to have a long career for sure in motorsport.
I mean, that speaks volumes about you as a person, quite frankly, because we know so many hot-headed people in this business that, especially who let their egos go unchecked. And I was talking about this last week with Steve, but I think one of the true gifts that someone can have in a situation like this, where they're going to keep plugging away and get very good at something, is maintaining humility through all of that, recognizing that at any day it could go away, and you've got to treat those relationships. I mean, that's amazing that was your first sponsor, and we're talking about decades ago.
Oh, now they're my title sponsor.
And they're still, I mean,
yeah.
That's amazing. So I mean, if there ever were a lesson for anyone to take away that wanted to get a start in motorsports, know how to get yourself into a team, whether it's sweeping a floor or doing an Excel spreadsheet, right? Like whatever it
100%.
takes, and develop relationships with people, meaningful relationships with people. And if you're good at that, and I think you probably already get an idea of Tanner's mindset here, where you're so inquisitive, and you've always had that curiosity like I could care less about the business side when I was younger. Literally, I was like the stereotypical put me in a car, I'm fast idiot. And I mean, seriously, I mean, I was
like
that guy.
I like
Was.
Yeah.
Thanks
Great.
for letting me have that. And I'll Venmo you later. But that's the thing is that I mean, and that's something I've known about you, and I've always known about you, and I'll say this, like, and people have said this all the time, because you and I, again, we've had such a long relationship now that's been so valued for me, and it's been so much fun. And you get all the naysayers that you meet along the way, like, oh, that Tanner, or whatever, and just the resentful guys with the egos. And I've always said, you know what, there are plenty of guys in motorsports that don't belong where they're at, or have accolades they don't really deserve because dad paid for it, or they were just right place, right time. And I'm like, Tanner Foust is not that guy. I'm like, I've watched you, I've known you, and the cool thing about you to me is that you're just as strong out of the car as you are in the car as a person. And that's always been the best part about hanging out with you but it's cool, like, chatting with you now and kind of hearing the genesis of it all is cool, because we get to see.
Yeah, because we've never sat down like this.
No, we never have. I've heard little
right.
bits and pieces, but we've never, like, let's kind of really talk about it, because obviously the podcast is a reason to do that. We've never really had a reason.
Right.
And I think I know you really well, but it's so cool to hear this, because I realize, again, a lot of the why behind the who in that context, And
I feel like I need a podcast so I can hear your story, because I hear a lot of tidbits, and we know the same road. Virginia, we've jumped the same three little pigs on Beulah.
It's so funny. It's so funny. It is weird. Like, when I was saying we have a lot in common, like, I was born in England. I'm older than Tanner, so a lot of this, like, I was sort of 10 years ahead of him on all of this stuff, or so. But like, what we did and how we did it and when we did it is, like, strangely similar. And I don't know if that's why we get along so well, or we see the world kind of the same way, but it's weird.
It was very similar, just it was in black and white.
Yeah, I had wooden spokes.
Yeah.
Yeah. But it's almost uncanny in a way, but it's kind of cool, because then, because I thought it already kind of bit me in the butt, because I already said, oh, you must have been thinking about driving when you were skiing and BMXing, and awkward pause, and you go, no. But I think that, I mean, to me, like, that's gold right there, because then it gave us an opportunity to, like, dig into how you ended up where you did. And it isn't exactly my story, and of course it wouldn't be, but it's I think that this stuff is so interesting and so fascinating.
So the first ride and drive that I did from my side, all right, so you'd heard, Morgan. Now, to be fair, Morgan kind of, like, got me the gig, right?
Yeah.
So he was trying to talk me up, probably, to make sure that, because at that time that was not easy to do, to go get a day rate, to go sit right seat, and to drive, and to go travel around, stay in nice hotels.
Yeah, that was kind of
there were a lot of
pile of those programs.
There were a lot of people trying to get into that program. This BMW one was pretty big. I remember it was like 36 driver instructor people. LA was 17 days. That first city was the longest. It was the longest one I'd ever done. I remember the hotel we stayed in, because I crashed the rental car in there. I mean, I scratched the rental car, but if you remember, there was, like, Bob. These stories would come out about how I read it. I read it online. I was like, oh yeah, Tanner Foust crashes a rental car, causes a fire, burns 60 cars down. And I'm like, what? I'm so nervous about getting fired. There's all these stories, of course. Oh, this one guy hit a cone and they sent him home. So you don't hit a cone in the parking lot. You were the czar of all that stuff, doing the talk in the tents, and then sitting in your minivan, just looking over all these instructor peons doing their laps, like, okay, got a cone there. And Rex would collect money for like a beer fund for every
That's right.
cone you hit.
Yeah, yeah.
That was $5 for the green cones and $1 for the orange cones. It was like a lot of pressure to come into. This is the first time I'd ever been paid to do any of that stuff, you know? And the winter driving school was great. It's comfort food for me because it's an extreme environment. These people coming into it, you have such a big advantage as an instructor over the students that it's real easy to talk and coach that stuff because you're on the ice every day and they just come in from New Jersey and it's their first time there. But this stuff in the parking lot, it's with 36 other people that have been doing this for a living, and you're kind of the punk showing up. So I was sure I was getting a plane ticket home.
Yeah.
And you came up to me. It's always bad when the minivan showed up to your rental car while you're hanging out waiting for the next session. You rolled the minivan up and you're like, hey, that last session there. I'm like, oh no. Like, yeah, you came around there, you had that, and there was with the X5, so they would pick a tire up every once in a while. You're like, yeah, oh, it's gorgeous. The tire's in the air, tires set down, brake lights came on, brake lights go off, the next tire comes in the air. It was really, really nice. And I was like, oh, sweet. I got a compliment, and I got invited to the sushi dinner. There was like this, rumor of a sushi dinner that would go on. Yeah, that was like a associate sponsored dinner from Skip Barber, and sure, okay, all the there are only select instructors that got to go to this dinner, and it was Tokyo Dells. I'm sure you remember the night because you were sober as a judge, but I do remember dancing a lot on tables and chairs and playing spin the bottle in the girls' bathroom with a large bottle of Sapporo, which broke, and somebody got their foot cut. Remember, we got like escorted out.
Yeah.
Moral of the story is you drove everyone home. I didn't make it to call time in the hotel lobby the next morning. And I woke up. I don't even remember. I had like traumatic amnesia from the actual morning. I don't remember waking up or anything. I just remember strolling out and probably shirt half tucked and getting into arbitrary rental car, and you're driving it. And I'm like, I'm sure I'm going home. Like, this was probably day 4 out of 17. I don't know.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's the end of it. I completely screwed the pooch. So I tried to make some small talk with you, and I was like, yeah, that was quite a time last night, huh? Boy, I can't believe you can even drive right now. And you're like, I've never had a drop of alcohol in my life. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm dead.
So fired.
Yeah, so fired. And you didn't fire me then, so I've been paying you back ever since. Anyway, I possibly
it's still just this massive debt that is owed me. I just want to be clear.
Yeah,
because I'm sure you understand this. You have a spreadsheet for this because of the principle of compound interest.
Yes, that's right. No, I get it. And inflation on top of that. I mean, this is crazy.
It'll never go away.
No, it's never going to go away.
So,
but yeah,
those programs. I'll tell you, and you know this, but so because Morgan and Rex spoke so highly of you, and because of those laps in the X5, you were never going to go home ever.
Yeah.
I mean, because
I didn't know
that was always the thing. Of course, I would never let you know that, but that was always the thing with me. Is not, like, even you could even hit a cone if the car was beautifully poised and balanced when it did it. That's all. Right. I just cared about the art of driving. That's all I ever cared about, and all I wanted was instructors on that program that cared too. And it's like you and I having a discussion about vortices is no damn different. It's just an appreciation for art. And driving certainly can reach that level, and that's when it becomes magic. And there's so few people that ever get a car to that level out of all the people that we've ever known. And as soon as I saw that in the X5, I'm like, that kid's coming out to dinner, and I don't care what he does, he ain't getting fired.
Well, I wish you would have told me that. I probably would have had another round.
Now I can tell you. See, now I can tell you. This doesn't wipe the debt, by the way, just to be clear.
Yeah. Noted.
Yeah, okay, good. so that, yeah, I think, but that's it's so cool again to hear you going up through the ranks, and again, sort of the things that, and all of that, like, being worried about hitting a cone, it keeps you on point. It makes you drive better, right? And it you're now put in a situation where, and we did our own little races whenever we got a chance, right? When we were doing setup or whatever it happened to be. We were always trying to race each other here and there. We do the snow challenges in the Crown Victorias and from the Meadowlands parking lot. You remember driving into the city in the snow in the Crown Vics, like to go to Tamoy? Just some of the best drives ever is to go into Manhattan when it's snowing and there's no one on the roads, like, because everyone on the East Coast is paranoid of driving in the snow, as far as the general population. So we used to go from the Meadowlands into the city in these rear-wheel drive Crown Vics that, it turns out, when you push down on the foot parking brake on a Crown Vic or on a Cadillac, it doesn't lock. So you just have a fly-off parking brake whenever you want to use it.
Best rental car ever.
Best rental cars ever. Crown Vics and Grand Marquis and Town Cars did the same thing. And we'd go in there just tandem drifting in the snow with these rental cars and go in and have some of the best sushi in the world, literally, in an abandoned Manhattan, and then drive back. Those were really good memories. And Tamoy just closed down.
I know.
Moment of silence for one of the best sushi spots in the world.
King was the guy. Remember,
King was the guy.
He was the chef. And
I was in there maybe 3 years ago. Was the last time I was there, and I went up and I didn't dare put my hand out to shake his hand, but I did just tell him thank you, because I just didn't know when I'd see him again, and it had been a long time since I'd been there. And he's like, oh, very respectful, of course.
He probably was thinking, now we can close. It's your fault. He honestly, because I went there last week, and my daughter came out, and it was this great trip, and I was going to get to take her to Tamoy. That was one of the things on my list. Like, we can do whatever we want, but on Tuesday we're going to Tamoy. You're going to love it. You take bites out of Toro like an apple. It's going to be incredible.
I just started drooling a little.
Yeah, I know. I can't even. She was like, yeah, but is there, do they have cooked chicken? This is my daughter. But yeah, but it was closed anyway. So yeah, it's an end of an era for sure. But yeah, you can't help but learn stuff with a group like that. There were a lot of interesting people that came through those ride and drives. We all sort of had most of us had other things going on. At that time, I was also coaching in Formula Mazdas and it was like an arrive and drive series, trying to make rules.
Rotary Rockets.
Good recall. You came out.
Remember me coming out with you to Putnam Park?
Yep. Nicholas Ronday came out. I remember once. But
future podcast, I'll have Nicholas. He's on the short list. I need to have him out.
And David Jones. But yeah, that was you came out to Putnam Park. It was a cool track, actually.
Remember what you did to me in I believe it was a Crown Vic rental car. So you remember it rained like crazy, and we were doing hot laps. We were having fun, but there was a big puddle in town that you wanted to drive through. So we did that. I had a really bad migraine. I get migraine headaches, for those of you that
yes.
Know. So I get migraines. I had a really bad migraine. So I was laying down in the back of the Crown Vic trying to sleep. And Tanner Foust, being Tanner Foust, which is like the most mischievous person that you've ever met when behind the wheel of a car, decided to launch it off a railroad track with me sleeping in the back. And I remember how hard I slammed into the roof of the Crown Vic.
I remember seeing you in the mirror. I saw you in the mirror float up.
Howling. I have a migraine. I have a migraine headache. And Tanner's like, this is going to be funny. You remember when you take midterm bridges and
20 years later, we're still laughing about it.
So, and this is why.
Yeah. That was, I think Roger, the guy who owned the series, was in the car too.
Yeah, and he was sitting in the front seat and I was in the back, and Roger probably egged you on, and you did it, not realizing maybe I'm hoping you didn't realize I was laying down with no seatbelt on in the back seat.
Gosh, I do remember you floating up in the air and hitting the roof. Yeah, good times. See, and we're still loving it. years
Yes.
later. But
Yes. So
yeah,
so
that was
then
it was a good way.
are you rallying at all during this? Or are you just co-driving with
It
Scott?
was kind. I want to say it was a couple. I was starting the co-drive stuff with Scott, and it wasn't until a few years of doing winter driving school and ride and drives in the summer, winter summer back and forth, that a Samuel Hubinet, somebody that actually through the BMW program, you and Rex had brought over from Sweden. He was, I
Yeah.
think, a participant.
Yes,
Came
he
as a
was.
participant, and you guys were like, okay, this guy can drive, and started actually flying him out to do events as an instructor. We taught him English the hard way.
Yeah.
I think his first word was boobs, and it went
Second word, third
that
word, fourth word.
yeah, went downhill from there. But it was and now of course, he's probably one of the busiest stunt drivers in the commercial world, living in LA. And has been a friend of ours and stuff ever since then. But it was after doing that for a while that Samuel went to a drift event when D1 came to LA. The Japanese guys all came out to LA. Samuel went out there and entered with a guy, Rich Rutherford and Nick Kuhnwalter,
In a rented
and
350Z.
in a rented 350Z, and qualified. That's how
Yes.
kind of low
Great
level
story.
it was back.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then and I got stuck. He abandoned me while I was doing your job of talking in the tent at that point. He abandoned me there. So I went to the next Formula Drift event. And so from then on, I was doing rally and drift together simultaneously.
Those were some amazing times, because the thing that struck me about that was really cool was, remember, like, the BMW stuff turned into Simon Kirkby, who's the guy that hired me way back in like 92 and was our boss through all that. And of course, Chip Pankow.
Yep.
But Simon, eventually, I was like pestering him the whole time, like, I want to do a real school. Like, I want to take these BMWs. And then we had Alex Schmook, who was our BMW client, and Alex loved driving. And so we were always coaching Alex, and he was in the cars. Every time the customers weren't in the cars, Alex showed up early, and we were coaching him, and I was always in his ear going. And I was super frustrated with Skip Barber and the way they were teaching schools with the 8 minutes on the skid pad thing. And I was already convinced that car control was the key to driving success, and this, that, and the other thing. And so through that, I finally got the green light. And I'm trying to remember the year, but it was the year of the what's the series?
The M5,
the
V8
39 M5.
Yes.
And we did the car control clinics. And so we did a year of that. The courses were a huge success. Remember those runway courses we set up that were like,
we did 90 miles an hour.
Yeah.
90 miles an hour.
Yeah, a mile and a half.
Started the day out. You'd start the day out, I remember, with 2 hours on the skid pad.
2 hours.
For some reason, Nicholas's students always puked in the slalom.
The demos.
On the demo labs. I don't think they could understand what he was saying while he was hurling them through the slalom, and he had about a 20-25% puke ratio. But it was, those were epic. And
we got to do so much sliding. Yeah, we got to do so much drifting. And remember, we used to do tandem drift at the end. And it was before the D1 thing. That's the thing that was critical. It was because Samuel was over there, and it was all sort of like we were doing it just because we thought it was the right thing to do. And we knew about drifting in Japan.
Yeah.
And we were teaching car control, and we just, we were in love with those E39 M5s. They were just flipping brilliant cars to do that.
They're awesome. And I had some of the first photos that I have, like, on a phone that could take a photo of those M5s sliding around, smoking tires. And it was just like the first time you're just like, the way that you make something look fast and powerful is if it has tire smoke coming off of it. That's just the way you do it. And there's just no second question on that one.
Yeah.
Those programs were awesome. Nobody got hurt amazingly with the speeds that we were going on those.
Yeah.
We were in the car the whole time, which was one thing. But yeah, that was great practice. Setting up the tracks. Remember, the tracks had to almost flow drifting
Absolutely.
in order to be acceptable. And we would go through tires on great rear wheel drive cars with free tires. And that was, Samuel went on to be the first champion of Formula D from all of that practice.
Absolutely.
And it's like, yeah. And
then you went on to be a 2-time champion, and
yeah, from that stuff, I think.
And then, of course, Rich was there for some of that, and he went out was drifting. Kuhnwalder. We had so many guys that went through that, and they were very select instructors that got to do it. And all of them are still notable in motorsports. It was just like one of those sort of lightning in a bottle moments where we had the right car, the right program at just the right time. And a lot of cool stuff came out of that, which I thought was amazing. And hey, at the same time, let's see, when would that have been that we were doing that? It was like the early 2000s, right?
Yeah.
That was going on. It was like probably like 2003 or 4 when those cars were out, when we were doing those programs.
Yeah. It would have been 2003, 4, because then
Maybe
drifting
2.
got going 3 and 4. Yeah.
Because I was coming out to you and we were doing the perfect day in our Talons at Steamboat.
Yes.
And
that's right. So I still work there. Yep.
So we were, so I live in Boulder. Tanner lived in Steamboat. Strangely enough, he does again. Where he's right now. He's in Steamboat, and literally like 20 some years in between, right? And so I would drive out from Boulder, and we would do this thing called the perfect day. And I still tell the perfect day story when people say they've had a good day. I'm like, nope, you've had a good day. You haven't had a perfect day.
Yeah, it could have been a great day, but it wasn't perfect.
Explain the perfect day to you. Exactly. And so let's explain the perfect day, because I think it was pretty well thought out.
So we'd start out with early morning laps on the track.
Yes.
So we'd go to the shack. We go to the shack and get breakfast, which is kind of like a Moe's Diner. It's a classic diner in Steamboat. On the way to the track, start out laps on the track. This is when the track is like sandpaper. It's not ice. It's got this rime that sticks to the ice overnight. So it's got this consistent grip, and it kicks up this fine dust that just you can't see, but you can see the sparkles in the air on these Bluebird Steamboat days, just like today. And it's those early morning laps are sweet. And of course, the stopwatch would come out. There'd be a lap time set, and there'd be a little bit of a race there. And any instructors that wanted to show up would. Then we'd go to the mountain, boot up, and the office was right on the side of the mountain, you remember? So you just boot up and ski right out of the office, right down to the gondola or to the lift, and we'd go ski. We'd ski till we get to a little bit after lunchtime, go to Slopeside Grill.
Or Slopeside Grill.
Tugboat.
Yeah.
Yep. Slopeside Grill, you'd get a burger. If you went to Tugboat, you get this like chicken sandwich with pineapple on it. Oh my gosh, so good. And then head back out to the track and catch the afternoon laps. And that was while one bitter instructor was still working, like picking up cones, hooking up the steel to drag, to grade the track and everything. And you're over there just like still high off of your cheeseburger and your runs this morning.
So true.
Crushing this track, just wringing out the last life the track had in it for the day.
We're doing rim shots around the outside because that's the only place the grip was left.
Totally. And you'd go in, you'd show up to the parking lot, the instructor working, and be like, oh God. And you'd be like, oh, we'll help you pick up cones, no problem. Rev limiter all the way down the straightaway. It was pretty abusive. But then after that, we'd go to the hot springs.
No, we go sushi and then
sushi. Go get some sushi. And there's actually good sushi in Steamboat, surprisingly, for being a mountain town. And then up to the hot springs where you could jump in this ice river that was next to it. And it's like, the hot spring where it's got the rock floor. It's real natural. It's an all natural hot spring, just epic. And it was nude after 6 o'clock, or clothing optional, I'll say, after 6 o'clock. which didn't mean anything because it was so dark. No flashlights were allowed or anything like that. But occasionally a flash would go off, and then you'd blink and you'd see 30 pairs of boobs. That was just
the perfect day.
Yeah, that was the perfect day.
Perfect end for the perfect day.
Yeah. Exactly. It was amazing.
Yeah,
we're gonna have to recreate that now that we live here again.
I think we're gonna have to do it.
Yeah.
I think we can do that. So yeah, we'll have to try and maybe even figure out something else we could inject in there that make it even better. But that was pretty ideal. And so that was all going on. And what's that? You thought of
razors, something? I think, yeah.
Razors.
Yes, with razors. Because here at the house, we're thinking about building a little ice track for razors. Probably not. We don't want to, that kind of maintenance. They dig too deep, Just want to, but they'd be grippy enough with little knobbies on there. I think it'd be fun.
It sounds good. Sign me up.
Thanks for watching part 1 of my interview with Tanner Foust on the Optimum Drive podcast presented by TFL. Tanner's going to come back and get to finish his story, and then we're going to do a third podcast after this one's all over, where we're actually going to talk about specifically driving and Optimum Drive and sort of his methods and techniques. So we're going to have fun with this. He's a great driver and a great resource, and also very much a guy that thinks about everything he does in exquisite detail. So he's a fun guy to interview on a podcast because he really knows what he's talking about and can explain things really well. So love having him here. Make sure you stick around for all the Tanner Foust podcasts here on Optimum Drive, presented by TFL.